We have fun theories about Firefly being the same as Sam, but I'm not here to talk about that. This is a speculation video about Sam's previous affiliation, the Iron Cavalry Regiment of Glamoth. I wanted to talk about how the Iron Cavalry came to be, as well as how they might have ended. Before we talk about the Iron Cavalry, however, we must first talk about Glamoth. Since most people don't read the flavor text, let me summarize the Glamoth lore for you. We read from the planar sphere that Glamoth was once a prosperous empire, ruled by the sovereign at that time, Empress Titania. However, even they were powerless against unending waves of the swarm, said to be so numerous they were referred to as the sun-swallowing swarm. But from the ruins of the broken empire, Titania built up a new army, calling it the Iron Cavalry. The silver-white knights traveled to and from the various star systems of Glamoth, fighting back against the swarm. They were likened to warriors born to fight the swarm. It is unknown what these knights look like, but they gave a sense of hope that one day light will once again shine on this darkened land. But as the battle turned into a stalemate, the empire became the very thing it wished to eradicate. From hope, people started looking at the Empress and her Iron Cavalry with fear. Nonetheless, the Iron Cavalry Regiment formed the last line of defense at the border of Glamoth, where the battle raged on endlessly. Upon their warships, the Silent Knights bore a mission, carrying the hopes of the entire empire, and faced the tides of enemies drowning out the stars. Now, from the planar rope, we read the Glamoth Republic was desperate to turn the tide against the invading swarm. They threw all sense of ethics and went on the path of modifying humans, with the aim specifically to create a weapon born to fight. The result was Titania, a being that has control and command over any knight connected to her. These knights of Titania spend their short lives fighting and dying for a shared dream to defend their empress and her empire. But the empress and her empire, this was all a lie, uncovered at some unknown time. Nonetheless, the Iron Cavalry continued to give their all for a false narrative. The battle continued on for a long time until so much debris from both mechanical and insect limbs accumulated in the star system, which was later called the River of Death. And even when the swarms stopped becoming a threat, Glamoth never got to regain its sun, instead sinking into another lightless night. The civilization known as Glamoth faded away, and the long-awaited peace came to the empty stars. The long river of stardust and debris flows silently along the void. Now that most of us are somewhat familiar with the lore, we can now proceed with the actual speculations. So, part 1. First, I want to talk about how the Iron Cavalry was created. This was briefly touched upon in the planar rope, but I want to further expound on the subject matter. Before we proceed, I think it's best to explain what prompted the creation of the Iron Cavalry in the first place, and that would be the Swarm. So, who were the Swarm? Well, based on my research, there are two kinds of swarm. There was the swarm during the swarm disaster, which was composed mostly of Tazeron's clones, Tazeronth being the aeon of propagation. Then, there was the swarm after the swarm disaster, which were referred to either as the remnants or the descendants of the original swarm. For this video, when talking about the swarm, I'm referring to the swarm during the swarm disaster. The swarm after the swarm disaster, I'll refer to as swarm remnants or swarm descendants. But why bother distinguishing the two from each other? And that is because I believe Glamoth fought in the swarm disaster and not just against the remnants of the swarm. There are clues sprinkled in the Glamoth lore which coincides with the swarm disaster lore, but that can be a topic for another video. So if you're interested in watching that video, why not subscribe to the channel? If I hit 100 subs in 1 week after this is released, I'll make that video showing that Glamoth was a victim of the swarm disaster. While you're at it, why not like the video and comment down your thoughts as well? Those would motivate me to make high effort content like this one. Now, with all that being said, let's continue on with the rest of the video. So why do all this? Why define the swarm? And how does it relate to the Iron Cavalry? Well, we have three clues in the Glamoth lore that helps explain the origins of the Iron Cavalry. So, clue 1. If we look at the orb's item description, we also see an obscure reference linking both the Iron Cavalry and the swarm to each other. Uthika, or Uthike, refers to the protective shell that covers the eggs, a structure made by certain animal species. Of these animals that make Uthike, one stands out in particular, Coleoptera. In-game, Coleoptera is used to refer to Tazeron's race. As of now, this doesn't really mean anything, but it is suspicious that such an uncommon word is used to refer to the mecha suits of the Iron Cavalry. As an aside, in real life, Coleoptera is the order in the animal kingdom used to describe all kinds of beetles. Also, did you know that fireflies are considered beetles as well? They are part of the subfamily Lampyridae, which is under the order of Coleoptera. It's an amazing coincidence, don't you think? But anyways, that's all for clue 1. Now on to clue 2. So, Titania's method of commanding and controlling the Iron Cavalry is via telepathy. This means physical distance is not a factor when Titania conveys information to the Iron Cavalry. You know who else is capable of doing that? That's right, Tazeronth. I put capable in quotes because according to in-game lore, the swarm and their Aeon is so stupid that they only think of propagation. However, the little information that they can convey is said to be enough to trigger the entire swarm scattered throughout the entire universe. So now we're getting into something. If clue 1 is cueing us to a potential relationship between the swarm and the Iron Cavalry, and clue 2 is telling us that the Iron Cavalry may have copied some of the swarm's abilities, clue 3 is basically the game telling us what to think. The orb is very explicit about how the Iron Cavalry became like the swarm. The number one feature of the swarm is its uncountable population, and it seems the Iron Cavalry was able to match that. I think these 3 clues are sufficient enough to prove my claim, but just to strengthen my argument, I would also like to show 5 other clues. They are pretty disconnected, not gonna lie, but if you give me a chance, I'll explain why they prove my claim. So, for clue number 4, Titania was described as a weapon born to fight, designed for war against the swarm. Then we see that the Iron Cavalry were described to be warriors born to fight the swarm. So there's a connection here that is more than just leader and subordinate. Then for clue 5, Sam was said to be a genetically engineered warrior. So we keep the genetically engineered portion in mind. And then for clue 6, the knights in the Iron Cavalry were said to live short lives. And for clue 7, we read about Glamoth altering the essence of humanity in order to adapt to the war against the swarm. Finally, for clue 8, we read about Tazeron's ability to self-duplicate, which was what led to the creation of the swarm in the first place. Now, do you see where I'm going with this? Clue 8 should have cued you in on what I wanted to say. But just in case it's still not clear enough, the Iron Cavalry are clones of Titania. So Glamoth created Titania with Tazeronth as the blueprint, and from her they cloned the Iron Cavalry. Connected to Titania, this Iron Cavalry could be deployed anywhere and everywhere in the Glamoth star system. Having found a way to copy some of the Aeon's powers, the Iron Cavalry only needed to be commanded and controlled via telepathy. As time went on, more clones were created, and yes, a lot of died due to the fighting and due to their innate short lifespans, but the production outpaced the loss, and finally Glamoth got what it wanted, a swarm of their own meant to fight against the swarm. On another note, Titania was said to be the Queen of Fairies in one of Shakespeare's plays. If you look at the music video White Knight, at a certain point, Sam wears this wispy green cloak reminiscent of Firefly's colors. Bit of a stretch, but don't they look fair-like with those green ethereal wings? Also, White Knight sounds like White Knight, and the members of the Iron Cavalry were called Silver White Iron Knights. Speaking of White Knight, isn't that one of the suits Kiana wore in Honkai Impact 3rd? And if we talk about Honkai Impact 3rd, one of the prominent story beats there is that the Kiana we played wasn't the real Kiana, but a clone of the real Kiana. Surely that is a coincidence as well, right? Firefly was the Kiana XP all along. Anyways, that's enough of grasping at straws. I believe I've made my case clear that the Iron Cavalry was Glamoth's attempt at copying the swarm, and that they are a regiment of clones made from Titania. Now, we try to piece how the Iron Cavalry ceased to exist. So first, we look at this excerpt from the planar rope. Reading through, we see 2 different views on how Glamoth met its end. First, one believes the swarm was responsible for the destruction, while the other believes it is because they made a weapon too strong for them to handle in the long run. There is a third view, however. In the Trailblaze mission, The Sound and the Fury, during the dialogue with Firefly in her secret base, Firefly says that she's an interstellar refugee whose homeland was destroyed by either the Swarm or the Legion. Quick tangent, but why is Firefly unsure about who destroyed her hometown? When Ivan knows who destroyed hers, you'd think such a traumatic event would leave a huge mark in her memories, but she just says, oh, maybe this one or that one destroyed my hometown. But anyways, returning to the topic, to summarize, The planar rope tells of two different views. Either the swarm did it, or the over-the-top countermeasures did. And then, Firefly tells a different story. Either the swarm did it, or the Antimatter Legion did. Both claims do not coincide with each other. The claim about the swarm is fine, but the rest is a bit problematic. In essence, we get three claims. So why don't we check those claims one by one and see which is the more likely scenario? Let's look at claim 1. I think this one can be easily debunked by reading this one or this one. In essence, Glamoth was able to overcome the swarm, its destruction caused by other circumstances. Then let's look at claim 2. Their counteroffensive against the swarm was too over the top that they indirectly caused their demise. This is what the wiki says about this view. But I have a different take on the matter. It is said that Titania had thought of revolting against her captors. So, a rebellion culminating in the end of Glamoth is an interesting angle to look at, but I'll be the first to admit that this one is a bit weaker than the wiki's interpretation. For now, I'm shelving the rebellion take. So, let's go to claim 3. After weathering the events of the swarm disaster, Glamoth ultimately faced its end under the hands of the Antimatter Legion. We have no in-game lore to prove this concretely, other than Firefly's dialogue, which may or may not be true. Everybody lies in Pinacone after all. But we do have some in-game lore that can be loosely interpreted to support this claim. Recall that Nanook had 7 emanators under him, and that those emanators were called Lord Ravagers. These Lord Ravagers were either powerful victims of Nanook that succumbed to their will, or gleeful followers of the path of destruction. So of the 7 Lord Ravagers, one is of particular interest to us. That is, the unnamed Lord Ravager titled the Sun Devourer. Now, the title of Sun Devourer should have raised some alarm bells, because that title sounds oddly similar to a phrase mentioned in the Planar Orb. But we know that the Swarm cannot become part of the Antimatter Legion because they follow the path of propagation. So is the Sun Devourer nothing more than a miss? Well, we do know of another entity that is likened to the Swarm, don't we? Perhaps this is what happened. As Titania fought against the Legion, Nanook saw their power. The Iron Cavalry fought to the best of their ability, but of course, they are no match to the Aeon that idealizes destruction. Nanook then coerced the defeated Titania and conscripted her to their army, turning her into the Lord Ravager's Sun Devourer. Here's another scenario. We know from a previous section that Titania had thoughts of revolt against her captivity. Perhaps, during the war against the Antimatter Legion, Titania used this chance to defect to the Camp of Destruction, and with her newfound power as a Lord Ravager, destroyed her home world, just like how Nanook destroyed theirs. Interpret it however you wish, but if the Antimatter Legion truly did destroy Glamoth, it is highly likely that Titania would have become the Lord Ravager titled the Sun Devourer.